Hi, I'm Ed Burns, Principal Architect for Java on Azure at Microsoft. I'm here to talk to you about running Oracle WebLogic Server on Azure Kubernetes Service. First, a little bit about me. I've had the good fortune of having a small role for a very long time in helping the web evolve from the client to the server and into the cloud. I realize there's a lot of great content here at the conference, and I'm very grateful for your time investment. So let me explain how I plan to spend that time. We'll start with an overview of Java EE on Azure, indeed, Java on Azure overall. Then we'll go specifically into Oracle WebLogic Server on Azure, and then we'll dive even deeper into the specific way of running WebLogic on Azure Kubernetes Service. We'll sprinkle some demos throughout and finish up with a summary and call to action. Here's the overview. Our approach for doing Java on Azure is Java your way on Azure. Or you could say Java your way on Azure. Depends on if you like to use Java as a noun or a verb. I prefer to have an action-oriented approach, so we'll call it Java your way on Azure. We're approaching Java with the growth mindset. This is a philosophy that Satya Nadella brought to Microsoft, and it's a matter of recognizing we need to learn it all rather than know it all. This is especially true with Java because Microsoft is coming to Java when it was already a very mature and widely deployed technology. And we believe that innovation happens elsewhere. This is a key principle of open source, in fact, and open source has been a part of Java for a very long time. It started with the initial motions of open sourcing key parts of J2EE, such as JSF, then went into the OpenJDK, and eventually became a way of putting out the Java EE specifications as Jakarta EE. Microsoft has elements of all of these things. We'll start from the top and go down. First up, we have the core Java runtime. This is represented by the Microsoft OpenJDK. This is a downstream of the official open source OpenJDK, which itself is the upstream for all of the other JDKs out there, including the main core Oracle JDK. The Microsoft OpenJDK is running thousands of VMs inside of Microsoft for LinkedIn and Minecraft and many of the other properties that run the Microsoft business. The Microsoft OpenJDK is amply covered in other talks in this conference. On top of the OpenJDK, we have Enterprise Java. Here, partnerships are even more important. We've partnered with Oracle, IBM, Red Hat, and VMware to bring you Enterprise Java experiences that meet you where you are. We'll talk more about what that means in the coming slides. Microsoft has been doing tools for a very long time, and tools are a part of our DNA. We have Visual Studio Code, which is an open source, lightweight, multi-language editor, and we have the Java Extension Pack, which is a full-featured Java development environment that meets Java developers where they are. It has great support for Maven, it has great support for Gradle, and it's well integrated to Azure. But we recognize that a lot of Java developers are very skilled and have invested years of their career lives in mastering IntelliJ IDEA. So to meet those Java developers where they are, we've developed a lot of plugins for doing the Azure services directly inside of IntelliJ. And we have Maven and Gradle plugins to enable all of the Azure services as well. Here's a graphical overview of Java on Azure for wherever you are in your cloud journey. Azure Stack is one incarnation of our hyper-converged infrastructure. If you want to run Java with Azure, but on-premise, it's a great solution. Java EE on Azure IaaS. This is basically Azure VMs with a large number of different Java runtimes that I'll talk about next. Azure Container Apps is a lighter weight container infrastructure and orchestration layer that's coming soon and is in the early stages of being publicly released now. Azure Kubernetes Service, which is what we are talking about today, is our production Kubernetes as a service offer. Azure Red Hat OpenShift is another container-based platform also run on Kubernetes, and it's developed in co-partnership with Red Hat, and it's supported as a first-party service on Microsoft Azure. Azure App Service is a very easy to use platform as a service option, and Java applications as well, from Tomcat to JBoss EAP to even the core JDK with just nothing else on top. Azure Spring Cloud is a first-party PaaS that we've developed with our partner VMware for running cloud-native microservice-based applications using the Spring Boot style of architecture. Here is a textual rendering of the previous slide for those looking for product names. Let's dive now into the vendor-specific offerings. One nice thing about working on Java EE at Microsoft, as opposed to working at a specific vendor, we're not in the business of picking favorites. Though this talk is about WebLogic on AKS, I need to point out that we run WebSphere just as well. This is Java your way on Azure. So here we have an offer to run traditional WebSphere on Azure. This is useful for lift and shift scenarios, and I'd like to point out that we now have support for trial licenses or evaluation licenses. This lets you easily get started while you secure your IBM Enterprise credentials. Maybe you have them, but you don't know where they are. You have to look them up from your IT department. This will give you time to do that. Or you might not even have them yet. This will give you time to contact an IBM sales representative and get started after your trial expires. So take a look at that link to learn more. Here's a more modern way to run WebSphere on Azure, and that's with WebSphere or Open Liberty. Liberty is a cloud native environment, so it's really easy to deploy on containers. That means AKS, and it also means Azure Red Hat OpenShift. These links will take you to learning more on Liberty on AKS and Liberty on ARO. Next up, from Red Hat, we have JBoss EAP on Azure VMs, and we also have JBoss EAP on Azure App Service. I'd like to point out that we recently added Java EE clustering, and we also have a very nice Maven plugin for easy development with IntelliJ and VS Code. Here's the main landing page for Java EE on Azure. If you take away one URL, this is the one. You can go here, bookmark this, and see the overview of everything for Java EE on Azure. Let me now show you how to find these offers in the Azure portal. And let's start out with JBoss EAP. We're just going to go ahead and search for JBoss and the auto suggestion. So let's select this first one, and you have a number of options to set up your JBoss virtual machine, EAP settings, and once you fill these out, you have set up JBoss running on Azure VMs. Let's take a look at WebSphere. We'll just put in WebSphere here. We'll take a look at the Kubernetes option for now. So we'll select Create, and here we have a pretty simple user experience that will stand up an Azure Kubernetes cluster, use the WebSphere Liberty operator, and install an application if you like. It's an optional step. You can deploy an application just by specifying a Docker image, or you could have the built-in sample application if you want. You can specify the number of replicas, and once you go to review and create, you can get started very quickly and easily. Let's drill down one level deeper, running WebLogic Server on Azure. Now, the main use case for all of these Azure Marketplace offers is to give you a way to quickly get set up and running in Azure. Here's the landing page for WebLogic on VMs. We'll dive into that in the demo in more detail. It has lots of great service integrations that we'll show. Here's the landing page for WebLogic on AKS. This sample architecture shows you what you can end up with. You can add lots of service integrations or keep it very simple. It's up to you. So let's do a quick demo in the Azure portal for this. And we'll select WebLogic. And we have many different options that show up here. The first I'll mention is these different base images. So we have a large collection of WebLogic base images with different combinations of WebLogic version, JDK, and operating system. In this case, we can see Red Hat and Oracle Linux involved. If you deploy this, it uses the regular Azure VM deployment, experience, which is also available through the Azure CLI and PowerShell and Azure SDK. And you get a VM that's pre-installed with a curated collection and patched collection of all of these software. If you'd like to have something that comes out of the box already running, that's these offers over here. So the admin server one is a single server with just the admin server. Cluster will set up a configured cluster, and dynamic cluster will set up a dynamic cluster. These are different features for Oracle clustering. Now that we've given you an overview of some ways to run Oracle WebLogic Server on Azure, let's do a deep dive in how you can run it on top of Azure Kubernetes Service. The main concepts to remember are the WebLogic domain and the Kubernetes operator. This diagram shows how to run WebLogic in general without considering Kubernetes or any kind of special container environment. I'm having it in a VM, but this also applies for bare metal configuration as well. At the bottom level, of course, we have the operating system. On top of that, we have the choice of JDK. Then we have WebLogic Server, which is the generic installation plus any patches you need. And on top of that, we have the domain. The domain is the first part where your own configuration comes into play. And the combination of the domain and your layer 4, which is the WebLogic applications and their deployments and any data source and JMS configuration, all of these together are represented here in this bullet list on the right. So if you want to take this to the cloud, what do? Put all of them in one Docker image? That's the big question. The problem of doing that, though, is we'd like to decouple the configuration and the runtime. So we'd like to be able to have the configuration separate from the image and be able to apply the configuration to the runtime without having to regenerate a new Docker image. To do this, you have to have a model of the WebLogic domain. We've defined YAML as the way to do this because that's just the way Kubernetes does things for its config files. And we have a number of tools to apply the runtime and to generate those steps that we talked about on the previous slide. So the config map is the key concept for allowing these things to be externalized. Here's another view on it. This is our final design for the Docker image. So we build the artifacts such as Java EE applications and third-party libraries into the Docker image. But for the models, we build the static model files to another Docker image and leave the dynamic model files as external configurations. So a new image is needed if there are changes in the applications, model, tools, or OS, but not a new image if there's just changes to the configuration. Let's have a look at a Docker image sample. So the sample uses the standard WebLogic image as the base image. This includes Oracle Linux, JDK, and WebLogic. It has 3 files in the artifacts directory, an EJBE file, and 2 JDBC drivers for the database. Then we have the domain model for this topology on the right. And we can see that there are file placeholders, there are separation placeholders for these kinds of values that are put in dynamically. It's important to remember that WebLogic Server is a centralized application server. It has a different context for different roles. Now, the domain is that logical unit that comprises all of the components and services that make up WebLogic. The admin server is the central controller, and the admin server monitors the clusters and keeps them managed. So this is how WebLogic has always worked. In order to make it work on Kubernetes, the WebLogic operator comes in. So the WebLogic Kubernetes operator has a Kubernetes custom resource definition. So the domain is mapped to this domain UID. That's that name I mentioned you could specify in the portal if you like. Then we have the admin server represented, and we have the clusters also represented in this custom resource definition. And that's the input to the Kubernetes operator. Gives you the ability to configure and provision and deal with high availability and security. And it also handles the health checks. This diagram shows what the Azure Marketplace offer does under the covers. Let's take a look at how this works in practice. We'll start again with searching for WebLogic, and we'll select WebLogic Server on Azure Kubernetes Service. I'll spend some time going through the different options. On the basics pane, you can choose your region. You provide the credentials for WebLogic and the domain tooling. If you say optional basic configuration, here's where you can specify the domain name and the domain UID that goes into the CRD. And also, if you like, you can specify your JVM options that will be passed to running WebLogic. For configuring the AKS cluster, you can select the option to have it create a new cluster on demand, or you can bring your own cluster. This might be useful if, for example, you have the Dynatrace sidecar already configured in Kubernetes, and you'd like to make sure that you can monitor your workloads with Dynatrace. This just works out of the box by installing things into an existing cluster and then selecting it with the picker here. We'll select yes for now. You can change the size for the VMSS, virtual machine scale set, and the number of nodes in the scale set. You can turn on Azure Container Insights. We have a really nice fully featured Azure Application Insights package that lets you performance monitor and do APM, in addition to, I mentioned, Dynatrace. And you can select this to learn more. If you select this option, you can turn on persistent volumes. This will cause persistent volumes to be mounted to your nodes. And this is useful if you want to set up the logging to go to those PVs instead of using ELK, for example. There's a number of options for image selection. You can choose to use a pre-existing WebLogic Server image from the Oracle Container Registry. Or if you're more advanced, you want to bring your own, you can pre-push that to your own Azure Container Registry instance and specify it here with a Docker tag. And it will be pulled and set up inside the cluster. Now, this assumes you already know what you're doing with the WebLogic Kubernetes operator and the domain tooling and create images, but it's a great way to use the offer with existing images that you have pushed. For ease of use, you can choose to specify Java EE application as a war, ear, or jar, and it will get pushed into the running cluster at the end of the deployment. TLS SSL, just as with VMs, this is how you handle end-to-end encryption. Networking is a little bit different. You can choose to have a standard load balancer and an application gateway ingress controller. There's a really nice feature for Azure Application Gateway that is tightly integrated as the ingress controller for Kubernetes, so this will set this up for you automatically. We'll select yes there. For DNS configuration, you can have your own DNS alias if you want. We'll just say no for that. Database, as with VMs, we have support for Oracle SQL or Azure Database for PostgreSQL. Or you can specify other, and you'll have the option to supply your own data source driver jar, which is very handy for things that aren't already baked into the offer. And when you get to the Review and Create tab, this is where the Azure portal will do a validation step on your inputs and make sure they're all ready to go. Because we didn't supply a lot of information, the validation will fail. So we'll just leave that for now. But if we had supplied everything correctly, this Create button would turn blue. It's important to point out that this portal deployment experience is actually going to be invoking an ARM template, which is managed in Oracle's WebLogic Azure GitHub project. So if we look inside the WebLogic Azure AKS, there is a whole environment set up here that will be deployed into the Azure Marketplace. Or, and this is very important, you can use it from GitHub Actions infrastructure as code or any other kind of CI/CD system that allows checking out things from GitHub, which is pretty much all of them. Let's show how that works with GitHub Actions. We have this sample application here, which has a workflow called setup WLS on AKS. Let's take a look at that code. So let's take a look at the steps that this workflow will do. One thing it will do is check out this WebLogic Azure repo that I just mentioned before. And it will check it out and invoke Maven to build the offer. This particular Maven build will transpile the bicep files into a JSON file, which is an ARM template that can be invoked with Azure command line commands. Once we have generated the JSON file that we'll invoke as the ARM template, we just use a push operation to make sure we can invoke it at a later step. So that's that artifact name, artifact path, which we'll see later on. And then we invoke sed a number of times to replace the placeholders that we've got in this parameters.json file with the values that we've collected from a combination of GitHub Actions secrets and hard-coded properties here. So passwords and usernames and database connections and such. You'll note that all of these values are what we would put in the Azure portal here. So this is another way to invoke the same thing, but using infrastructure as code. Once we have done the substitution into the parameters JSON, we do that validation step, which is similar to, in fact, exactly the same as the step right here. And of course, if it doesn't pass, the pipeline will fail. If it succeeds, we do az group deployment create. That's the command for invoking an ARM template. So this ARM template will start to deploy. I've already deployed it, so let's take a look at what that looks like. Here's my resource group, and let's look at the deployments. And we see we have one at the bottom. This is the main one, and all of these other sub ones are deploying the different aspects of the thing. So networking, app gateway, data source config, all of that based on the parameters that we provided. So if we select this one, we see it took 1 hour and 3 minutes, and this is because we didn't have anything created at the beginning. If you have some things pre-created, it might go a little bit faster. So we'll select on this and then take a look at outputs. So the outputs here will show you the cluster name, some URLs, which we'll talk about later. The ones I want to talk about here are the command to connect to the AKS cluster. So let's now show, here's where we can output the domain YAML. So we'll paste this and cat domain.yaml, and we can see we have the CRD. So if we look at this, we'll see there's the spec, there's the admin server, the clusters, here's the configuration, the domain home source type, that's model and image. Here's the image that we're using, so you can see our ACR name and the tag that was applied. And there's our JVM args that we have. So everything that is about the domain image or the domain specification is present there. Finally, I want to show this command to output the version and patches. Cat version.info. So here we can see the specification levels for all of the things that are running, Servlet 4.0, JSP 2.3. We have all these different WebLogic versions here. If you had any specific patches that were applied, they would be present in this file as well. This is a very useful way to show what's inside the WebLogic image that's running. The last one I want to mention is the cluster external URL. For us, this is the app gateway. So we're going to paste that up here and say cargo tracker. And this is our sample app that we deployed in the pipeline. This is the standard Java EE demo application. So let's look at the public tracking interface. We'll put in a value here of ABC123. We can show that we are seeing the next expected activity is to load cargo. Go back to the cargo tracker and select the mobile event logger, and this will let us route some cargo, and this will basically just push things into a JMS queue. In summary, we have a team at Microsoft that's dedicated to Jakarta EE on Azure success. We're eager to help you out. You can certainly engage us by filling out this migration survey, or you can use any of the links that I've specified here to learn more yourself, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thanks very much.